Welcome into the show today. Thank you for making this podcast a part of your regular routine. And if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to the show. Hit that subscribe button down there in the lower left or right-hand corner of the screen. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, rate, review, and follow this show wherever you're currently listening to the show. This podcast is 100% honest, 100% of the time. So a couple of topics to get into today. One revolving around the Minnesota Vikings, because this is a Minnesota Vikings podcast. But first, I want to touch on the Minnesota Vikings neighbors for a second. The Minnesota Timberwolves. Glen Taylor loses arbitration. This thing's been going on for months. And it appears that Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry are in line to be the new owners on the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, first things first, Glen Taylor made some terrible decisions. He looked Andrew Wiggins in the eye and gave him the massive contract because he looked him in the eye. The Joe Smith deal under the table, which costed the Timberwolves draft picks for years. Those moves are indefensible. But you've got to also remember that Glen Taylor saved the Minnesota Timberwolves from relocating. He didn't have to buy the team. He bought the team and saved the franchise. So as much as we would like to hate on Glen Taylor, let's not forget that the only reason the Timberwolves have are in Minnesota, the only reason why the Timberwolves are in Minnesota is because Glen Taylor purchased the team and saved them. So he deserves some credit. Let's not just crap on the guy. All right. The only reason why we have a Anthony Edwards, why we had a Kevin Garnett, is because of Glen Taylor. So let's just pump the brakes on the Glen Taylor hate. I saw this fascinating article, the Minnesota Star Tribune, real quick, and then I'm going to get to the Vikings conversation. Suhan. Are the Timberwolves and Lynx trading stability for excitement with Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry? Fascinating headline by Suhan. But I can't help but think that he's trying to get a raise. Because Glen Taylor owns the Minnesota Star Tribune. So Suhan's purpose in writing this article is to bow down to His Highness, his owner, and ask for a little cash on the side, a little maybe cash underneath the table for writing something like this. Anyways, funny story, fascinating situation with the owners switching. All right, let's dive into the Vikings. So this story came out last week, and I'm very careful on how I sift through off-season speculation stories. For example, Myles Garrett, should the Minnesota Vikings trade McCarthy for Myles Garrett? That is a flat-out and obvious no. Should the Minnesota Vikings bring in Aaron Rodgers and allow him to be QB1 or QB2 behind J.J. McCarthy? It's a flat-out obvious no. There's some stories that enter the stratosphere that are an obvious no, but they enter the stratosphere anyway because it's the offseason, and the offseason is all about speculation. Some of it reckless. Shout out Score North boys. However, there was this story that came out last week that I do believe has some merit and some substance. And it revolves around Cooper Kupp being available for really any NFL team, but particularly the Minnesota Vikings. Cooper Kupp went to his X account and thanked the city of Los Angeles and the Rams community for the years that he got to spend with the team. Says, I was informed that the team will be seeking a trade immediately and will be working with me and my family to find the right place to continue competing for championships. I don't agree with the decision, and I always believed it was going to begin and end in LA, which it still could. It began in LA, signed with another team. You sign a one-day contract with LA, began and ended in LA. Still, if there's one thing that I've learned over the years, there are so many things that are out of your control, but it is how you respond to these things that you will look back on and remember. I have taken so much pride in playing alongside my teammates for the LA community, so thank you for embracing my family and making this such a special place for us. 2024 began with one of the best training camps of my career. Preparations start now for 2025. Highly motivated, as healthy as ever, and looking forward to playing elite football for years to come. Love you guys, but coming for it all. So that was Cooper Kupp's post with a picture of him and his wife celebrating after the Super Bowl. Now, Cooper Kupp made that post for a reason. How many players in the offseason do you see go to their social media accounts when they know they're going to be traded or released and make long posts like that? That was a very intentional post. And what Cooper Kupp was sending in his intentionality was that if you're an NFL team, you don't have to trade for me. I know I'm gone. The Rams know I'm gone. They're not bringing me back. So if you're an NFL team, don't spend any assets trying to trade for me, because the Los Angeles Rams are going to have to release me if they want to get rid of me, which it seems like that is the likely scenario. Cooper Kupp has a $20 million cap hit on his contract next year. And you take a look at Cooper Kupp's stats, and Cooper Kupp's statistics last season were not deserving of a $20 million contract. Played 12 games, 100 targets, 67 catches, 710 yards. The year before, 12 games, 59 catches, 737 yards. 2022, 9 games, 75 catches, 812 yards. 2021, he had a spectacular season, one of the best seasons that you've seen from a wide receiver, almost 2,000 receiving yards, 145 catches. He's only had 2 1,000-yard seasons in his career. And a team is not going to send assets and take on that salary unless the Los Angeles Rams eat a massive chunk of it to bring in Cooper Kupp, which brings up the Minnesota Vikings possibility of bringing Cooper Kupp in as a wide receiver 3 option or as a wide receiver 2 option if Jordan Addison is suspended 3 games for his DUI. So I believe that Cooper Kupp is a realistic option for the Minnesota Vikings. 1, there's the Kevin O'Connell connection. 2, there are other people inside the Minnesota Vikings organization, not according to me, but according to the Alec Lewis's of the world and the Ben Gesslings of the world, the NFL insiders that revolve their coverage around the Minnesota Vikings. There are people inside the Minnesota Vikings organization that love Cooper Kupp. And if the Minnesota Vikings can get their hands on Cooper Kupp for a smaller price than what is currently available, well, then expect the Minnesota Vikings to be in the running for Kupp. Now, he's not an elite receiver anymore, but he's a good fill-in guy, a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3. He had 6 touchdowns last year and 5 touchdowns the year before. He's a good, classic, third down wide receiver that can run a good route and pick up a big play on 3rd and 4. And if you're bringing in J.J. McCarthy to be QB1, I would think having a guy like Cooper Kupp is even more valuable to your organization. You want solidified veteran wide receivers that know how to run routes, that know how to get open when you're putting in J.J. McCarthy as quarterback 1. I just read a Jeremy Fowler ESPN article written by someone else, but it said Jeremy Fowler lists his top 5 destinations for Cooper Kupp. And Kupp to Minnesota was not one of his top 5 destinations. But I believe there is a connection, and I do believe there is a realistic chance that Cooper Kupp ends up with the Minnesota Vikings. I did read this article on SI.com, Sports Illustrated, written by Will Raggett, as a Bring Me the News. And he writes this: would Kupp be an upgrade over Glen Taylor? Ad. Almost certainly, but he also costs quite a bit more. Any team that trades for him will be paying $20 million in 2025 and just shy of $20 million in 2026 between his base salary and roster bonus. It's hard to see the Vikings choosing to take that on, given that Jefferson's $35 million per year extension kicks in next season. Although it's backloaded to the point that his cap hit is just $15.2 million, and Addison will be up for a new deal in the next 2 years. Cooper Kupp's cap number is irrelevant because the Los Angeles Rams are going to have to eat a massive chunk of that if their intention is to get rid of Cooper Kupp. No team in the NFL is going to take on that contract, which puts the Minnesota Vikings in play for the veteran wide receiver. So, Minnesota Vikings, Cooper Kupp, I think it makes sense from both sides. And with Jordan Addison maybe being out for the first few games of the season, that puts Cooper Kupp in a role that makes him more valuable to start the year. So I think that it makes sense from both sides, from both parties. So I do believe that Cooper Kupp ends up with the Minnesota Vikings. That's my take. Cooper Kupp is a Minnesota Viking next year. Anyways, thank you for watching this episode, and thank you for making this podcast a part of your day. Hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening, and thank you for going on this podcast and journey with me.